Hey everybody, if you've been watching the news, then you're aware of the recent events that took place in the United States, in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the racially charged tragedy that unfolded there, and the strange things we saw, like people calling themselves Nazis marching in public in 2017. And you know that in the United States right now, there's just this massive sort of division between two sides, politically and along all kinds of other different lines. Um, but what I wanted to share with you is, as I've been reflecting on it, I don't believe the issue ultimately has its roots in politics or in who the president is or anything like that. But these are really human issues. And I say that because issues of hatred and bigotry and dislike and violence toward people not like you, those issues have been going on as long as the world has existed. These are not new phenomenon. And so I think it has a lot more to do with our human fallenness and sinfulness than any specific political climate, because we see it happen all over the world and we see it explode into literal wars every now and then across the globe. And so I was just reflecting on this and thinking, how does this happen, and what can we learn from it, and how can we do better in our own individual, personal, daily lives? And I really believe that what we're seeing unfold right now in the United States is when sin is responded to with sin, you sort of end up in this tornado of sin, and everything gets amplified and everything gets more intense and everything gets worse. Because the way we're wired as humans is that the worst in others tends to bring out the worst in us. And so, in other words, you can have one group who is saying something foolish and untrue and hateful, like white supremacists talking about how they hate anyone who's not white. And then the response to that, if it's responded to in like kind, sin just creates more sin. So people respond to that message by rioting and turning over cars and beating other people up and getting angry. And so they had something that they were justifiably angry about. But what they did is they responded to hate on one side with hate on the other side. And so this just creates this back and forth effect that just escalates and escalates. And as I mentioned, we see this in history between different ethnic groups around the world, just this escalation where somebody does something, it's wrong, and somebody's upset about that. And so they respond with the same level of hate, amplifying the situation, and it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Civil rights activist John Perkins had one of the greatest quotes of all time when he said, "Love is the final fight." And his point was that there's always going to be issues between individuals and between groups that get trapped in this vortex of sin that just escalate and escalate until somebody says, "I will not respond to hate with more hate." As believers, we would say, somebody says, "I'm not going to respond to sin with sin of my own." Love is the final fight. Somebody has to say, "I'm not going to respond to hate with hate. I'm actually going to respond with love." So in other words, I'm not going to call this person names. I'm not going to wish ill upon them. I'm not going to do violence to them. I'm going to condemn their ideology. I'm going to condemn what they're doing, but I'm not going to hate them. I'm going to love them in response instead. Love is the final fight. And the reason that message is so powerful is because that is what the gospel is. That's what Jesus did. We were enemies of God. We were lined up against him. We were in defiance of him. We were ignoring him, rebelling against him, spitting in his face on a spiritual level. And God didn't deny justice. He didn't say that didn't need to be dealt with. He did justice, but he did it to his son Jesus instead of us. And he responded to us with love rather than responding to our hate with hate of his own. He responded very differently. He dealt with justice, but he responded to us in love. And that's what the Christian is called to do. Every single one of us can get trapped in this same vortex of sin and hate in our own lives when In our marriage, our partner is stubborn, and so we say, I'm going to respond by being stubborn as well. Or in a friendship or work relationship where someone is petty, and so we say, I'm going to respond by being petty as well. And we go tit for tat, and we go eye for eye, tooth for tooth, forgetting that that's not what the gospel is. The gospel is grace and mercy and love, where we should have received wrath. And so I want to encourage you, as you reflect on what's going on along the lines of division in the United States right now, to understand that's a human issue. That's not a America issue. That's not a political issue. That's a human sin issue that has existed as long as the world has been around. And as Christians, we are called to not respond to sin by sinning on our own. So I want to encourage you to examine your own life and ask the question, is there any relationship, you and your spouse, you and your kids, you and your family members, you and your coworkers, you and your friends, you and anybody at your church, is there anybody who has been dealing with you in a sinful way and you are responding in like kind? Because there's no example in the history of the world of that ever making anything better. The message of the gospel is that grace and love win. They win. And so I want to encourage you to remember that, look at your own life, and make sure you're living out the example of Jesus. God bless you guys. I love you. We'll talk soon.